All right, folks, good morning. Welcome to the Sabbath School Podcast this morning. Oh, man, we're on a brand new lesson. Remember, we're a week ahead, but this week's lesson is going to be a really cool one. We were just kind of going over it a little bit with the wife here, and it's all about the Exodus and the journey to the Promised Land. Reformation has already joined us. Good morning, she says.
Good morning.
Or he, sorry. I did that again.
Yeah, don't do genders.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to. It just slipped out. So, anyways, we're on lesson 1, oppression, the background and the birth of Moses, and yes, this lesson is going to be interesting, I think, and we have a lot of Bible verses we're going to be going through. So we're going to be bowing our heads right now in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just ask that you'll join us this morning for this wonderful Bible study, Lord, with our online church. And we just thank you so much for this opportunity. In your name we pray, amen. So, and Heaven soon has joined us.
Good morning.
Good morning. And we have a memory text here. It is, the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them, and that's in Exodus 2:23. So Monique is with us, Thomas Berry is with us, and Tracy Brunson is also with us.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys. And so happy to have everybody here joining us this morning.
My grandson wants to say hi. No? Okay.
We got his arm.
We got his arm, but that was it. Come here, come say hi.
Come say hi.
Come say hi.
Just poke your head in the camera and say hi.
Right here. Right here. Come here. Yeah, come here.
Yeah, but go up to Grandma where you can poke your head into the.
Come over here and then look at yourself in the.
Little more this way.
Here?
Yeah, poke your head in the camera. There you go. Okay.
That's our grandson.
And Reformation says, hi, grandson. So Miko is with us. Happy Sabbath, he says. Sabbath. All right, folks. Well, looks like we've got everybody here, or almost everybody. And so this is, this is really cool because we have been actually talking about oppression and how when God's people cries out, God hears. This was in a podcast. Shannon's with us, Shannon Bruce, and this is Aaron Bruce's wife. And we're so happy to have you here joining us as well, Shannon. And this is interesting because we were talking previously about oppression and about how God's people, when they cry out, God hears. And when you look at the backdrop of the people, the children of Israel, these people didn't know God like they needed to know God, right? Mm-hmm. And so because they were brought out through this journey to understand who God is and to be able to be taught who he is. So these people were very ignorant of who God was because they had kind of forgotten over time.
Yeah, and just the book ahead at the end of Genesis, it says it's where Joseph dreamed a dream and he told his brothers, and they hated him about the dream of him being, above them. And they were like, well, how can the youngest one be above me? And then it goes on where they capture him, they sabotage his jacket, they put blood on it. The father almost dies of, sorrow. And that's just right before, and how our lives are just like a vapor. There's this like very little time we have, and then all of a sudden, all of his ancestors, everything he stood for, everything he done, changed in a couple decades, maybe 50 years.
Yeah, I don't know how long it was. That's
doesn't give a span.
Somebody would know probably the span of time that passed between Joseph and when we see the children of Israel. Now the children of Israel were great in multitude. In fact, here early on in the story, it talks about how Pharaoh had commanded the midwives to kill the male children and to leave the women or the girls, and the midwives were faithful to God, it says, and they did not kill the male children, and they began to grow, continue to grow. Now this concerned Pharaoh because he was concerned about the population of the children of Israel, and that one day they might overtake the kingdom because of their population.
Moses was born 41 years after Levi died.
Levi, and we're talking about
it says in the very beginning of Exodus, now these are the names of the children of Israel which came to Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. So that was the 12 tribes that ended up in Egypt. Then all their children must have forgotten what everything that conspired. I know they had an inkling, but they just lost it all. Just kind of like nowadays society, where people have lost it.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. You have, but God still listened to them, even though they were completely ignorant of how the workings of God. They knew that their fathers worshipped this God, and they were just far removed from it, and they didn't have that intimate knowledge anymore of who he was. But they had enough to where they knew it was wrong to kill the children when Pharaoh had commanded them. They went against the commandment of the Pharaoh. Now the word Pharaoh literally means king, and he was the king of the land, and he had power himself to have dealt with these midwives in a very harsh way. But instead, it says that God blessed these midwives. And so despite the commandment of the king, despite the threat of possible violence or mistreatment to the midwives, they followed what they believed God wanted them to do. Remember, they didn't have the Bible. They didn't have scriptures to sit down there and, this was all oral that they were given. This was all just passed down. And as the generations go by, I don't know if anybody ever's played the game telephone. With
the line.
Yeah, you get a big long line of chairs, and the way this would work when we would do it in schools is the teacher would whisper in the ear of the first person, and so nobody else could hear it, and then they would go and they would whisper it into the next ear, and then the next ear, and then the next ear, and it was always hilarious how much that message, that short little message, just from this point to that point,
Changed.
maybe 25 kids, and how much that message had changed. And so you could imagine how the generations would go by, the stories would be retold, and they would lose something each time that they were retold. And of course, the sinful heart, just falling into the customs of the Egyptians, the gods. Everywhere they looked, there was these foreign gods. And over time, they had forgotten God. And this is how it works for us too.
I was going to tell a Reformation. I see it was only like 41 years because it says the birth of Moses, there went a man of the household of Levi. So it was probably his son that took a wife, a daughter of Levi. That took the daughter, a wife of Levi. Took a wife, a daughter of Levi. So it was out of that tribe. Then she conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. Yeah, she took him down to the river, put him into bulrushes, and dabbed it with slime and pitch, and put the child therein. She laid it in the flags of the river brink. We were just talking about that, those big, long, flat grass with those, it looks like a wave, cottony white. And then the sister stood afar off, witness what was to be done of him. The daughter of the Pharaoh came down to wash herself in the river. My grandson said, take a bath. Which what really was what she did. With her handmaidens, and walked along the river's edge. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she went she sent her maiden to fetch it. And we know the story after that. She fell in love, which you cannot not fall in love, have that maternal love for a child. And then she actually sent for the Pharaoh's daughter sent that, what was it, the little girl to go fetch a wet nurse. And of course, the mother ended up being the wet nurse for that baby.
Amazing story and how God works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the mother herself was the wet nurse for the child that the Pharaoh's daughter had found. Wet nurse meaning that she was lactating. And so, there was some questions here, and I want to address them. Miko asked if we're doing home church now. Well, for the time being, yes. Mm-hmm. And they say they miss Ricky. Ricky...
I know, I miss Ricky too.
Everybody misses Ricky. Ricky doesn't like to join in under these circumstances because I would have to patch him in online, and I've asked him multiple times to do it, but he just doesn't feel right. And there's a certain environment that he has to be in order to communicate to the cameras, and so and that's understandable. And Ricky's, of course, as soon as he forgets about the camera, he's very good co-host and couldn't be replaced in any way, shape, or form. And so, but him and Dallas are gonna, for right now, I'm kind of in a transitional period. I'm praying to God. I'm trying to figure out what to do. There's some circumstances we're trying to work around. We won't get into everything, but I'm just trying to figure out how to do things going, forward from this day. Now, Dallas was gone a few weeks ago. I know last time I talked to him, and he was been going back and forth to Tennessee, and so.
Well, he's a doctor, so he probably has a lot of cases,
Well, his daughter lives in Tennessee, I think, and so he's been going back and forth, dealing with he's got a grandson too, and so, but him and Ricky will continue to do some programs as soon as they can get together and do that, and so we're still going to see Ricky, and of course we're trying to make the programs all work with everybody's schedules. Ricky's been working like too hard lately, and he gets home during the week and he's completely defeated, physically and emotionally. And so there's been a lot of challenges and stuff with all of that, but do continue to lift us up in prayer, and especially the program, the Prophecy Montana. But
I tell you who I miss. I miss Ruth and Dave, and I miss all those people. We would go all the way down there, but it seems so far, and we have to drag people in there. I don't know. I really love our Sabbath school though, and I always have, but I don't know.
Time will tell. Time will tell. God will reveal to us and give us a way that we can make all this happen and continue to do it. So I have no fear of that. But in the meantime, we are at home. It's been mentioned by you guys that one day we will have to have church at home. I don't know if that's today or not. I don't know if that's where we're at right now with that, because I think that's really where when we start losing our freedoms and stuff, and it might become more and more necessary over time. But yeah, and I really kind of resonated with this week's lesson because of how when people cry out to God, and we were talking a little bit about, and I know I don't want to make this political, but it's just the thinking of people nowadays is so controlled. When you have like an environment like the news media that create these scenarios where everybody has to fall in line on one part of the spectrum or the other. But you have these scenarios, and I look at the inner cities, and I see what's taking place in some of these inner cities and how people cry out for the injustices. And, we'll see like big news, breaking news stories that so-and-so was shot or something happened, and you'll see the outcry in the city, and it's being ignored by the so-called Christian people who claim that they brought this upon themselves. And I wonder if there was a similar notion in the days of Egypt, because remember, it was like you had mentioned, and and in this, we all know the story that Joseph was taken captive wrongly, right? He was sold into captivity by his brothers. He gained favor through Potiphar's household, but then because of some debauchery from Potiphar's wife, he was cast into prison where he stayed for quite a while before he was then vindicated. And because of his interpretations of the dreams that was given, he became the second ruler unto all of Egypt and was made in charge of everything. But then it says there came a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph later on and began to oppress the people and to put them under hardships and to make them work and really passed the first Sunday law. This was really about the Sabbath, the keeping of the Sabbath, because that's what Moses brought back to the children of Israel. But that goes forward into the story a little bit. We're not there yet, but as a classification of kind of like how God's people, when they cry out, God hears these cries, and of all people that should have empathy towards those who are oppressed, it is the so-called God's people nowadays that just have seemed to turn a deaf ear to it, and it's a terrible shame. Anyways, that's my little rant for the morning. So it says, heaven soon says, we understand because it is the end times, and soon we will be meeting in the woods and then by the river. That's right. Heaven soon also says that God hears our cries, and just like the cities and the plains, he will soon say, enough, I'm coming for you. And already God's people have begun to cry out throughout the world and even in the United States, but not so bad in the United States. It's more overseas and stuff.
What I get out of the Exodus is that they were just within that 41 years. I mean, I can't even believe it was only 41 years. How they just turned their back on God. Maybe, I mean, I'm not gonna, I don't mean anything bad about this, but I noticed when we were in California, we'd have neighbors. We'd be in these huge complexes, apartment complexes, and we'd see the Hispanic people that came right over from Mexico, and they would be happy. Oh, hola, and the wife would be all happy, and she, we'd wave. We're like, oh, what a nice family. Yeah, they have some little ones. And the next thing you know, we see them in the grocery market, and their little ones are taller than them already. The parents are working in the fields, or they're working in, the tomatoes, or there's a lot of produce in California. Then next thing you know, we're seeing those kids run around in a yellow car as fast as they can, and they're just unruly. I think what happens is we all have a tendency to spoil our children. We think we've had it hard somehow. We spoil our children, then they turn into entitled children.
Little monsters.
I really do, because I have my son upstairs. He's in his 30s, and then I have my grandson, and I notice there's things that he'll allow him to get away with. I can't say nothing because he's the dad, but I do see the leniency and the time frame when he can eat, and the time frame when like nowadays it's not go outside and play, it's sit here, play your game. I mean, it's so different. I remember we used to go out, and I was so hungry I was eating pine needles. Tops of grass. I'd pull the grass and eat the little inch or something of it, and I mean, I was looking for berries, like fanatically looking around, and one time I was in the bushes and I was making all this noise, and these kids go, "Look, Mommy, big bird." I had a yellow shirt on. I hid behind a tree. What? But the point is,
you literally grew up like a wild Indian, Lisa.
Yeah.
You were running around in the woods. I mean, you would like pick berries and fruit off of the trees. And
off the fiddlenecks. I would grab the tops of the ferns. The whole canopy would be totally full of those fiddlenecks. And then we had miner's lettuce, and I was always grabbing that. But I was only 100 pounds. I didn't even have to worry about that. Maybe the enzymes in that natural food was very healthy, because now when you buy organic, it's not really organic. We live by Early Bird down there. We watched them, that Early Bird organics, and they're spraying it. I mean, it's like, oh, and we're paying for it, you know. It's not really organic.
No, no, it's all poisoned food. And Thomas Berry says, I'm handicapped and mostly homebound. So where you are is my church, even though I am a member of the SDA church. So
Yeah, where two or more are gathered.
in my name, there I am in the midst. And
Jesus is in the midst.
Heaven Soon says he refused to acknowledge Daniel, just like today refused to acknowledge that there was a flood, even though there was a populace has a flood story. I think that was, it wasn't a quick enslavement, but a slow progression of taking away certain rights until they were trapped in slavery without a fight. The final push was to limit, which is the Moses is born. Now, you know, there's some truth to that. Okay, so their oppression came about because they forgot God, right? And like you were saying,
they kept them too busy to think about God. I think like our nowadays work.
Yeah.
We're working so late, and then to drive home, and then you got to feed the dogs, feed the kids. You know, you got to clean up.
Hustle, run,
get everyone in the shower, ready for, do the homework. Everything is a hustle. I can see that.
All necessary stuff. But I like what you were saying, Lisa, about the generations and how, we grew up and, okay, so you were describing how you grew up and you're thinking, okay, well, I want to give my kids more. I want to give them a greater opportunity. And really it was the hardships that we grew up with that gave us that little bit of toughness. And then we wanted to take that hardship away from our children and give them this great advantage in life, thinking that would propel them into, and really what it does is it takes away from our kids. That lack of hardship and struggle really takes away from our children and doesn't give them a sense of appreciation. And every generation gets a little worse, and it doesn't take very many generations. Like you were explaining, I mean, the immigrants is really a good example of what you're trying to explain, because, coming over fresh from Mexico, they've had it really, really hard.
They're so grateful and happy to be here.
Really are. And you can see that, and they're all smiles, and they're just so grateful. And they're to us
and loving.
To us, they look like they have very little, but they themselves feel like they have great abundance, and they're so thankful for it. But then their children grow up, forget everything. Well, they never knew what it was like in the old country. So then they just have this abundance, and they take it for granted, and they forget the struggles of their parents almost in just one generation. So it's very easy to see how this all happens. And then the neglect of God, and then oppression settles in because God can't protect those people anymore. But then the cries rise to heaven, and then God hears these cries, and he sends a deliverer. And this is what he did then, and he still does it to this day. Individually in our lives, I think he does that.
Well, I just remember seeing them, and they just, I remember I had this lawnmower, and they would use it for some of their jobs. And I'd say, oh, where's my lawnmower? It was right here. And next thing you know, it's back, filled with gas, oil changed. I mean, they didn't know how to communicate with me, so they just borrowed it and brought it back. But they were really nice people. I enjoyed, and we lived all over, so it wasn't just like one isolated incident. It was like many. We lived all over California, the coast, the mountains, inland, outland. We were everywhere. And we kept getting kicked out of places, I think. Nobody liked our kids. Too many children and too many animals.
Well, it is true, though. I mean, all of the immigrants, we have always had nothing but love and respect for. And,
yeah.
Because they are such a humble people. And we would get knocks on the door. You'd open the door and somebody would be selling tortillas or tamales. And you're just compelled to buy them. And it was super good food. I mean, we always would love those homemade tortillas, and you could buy them cheaper than you could the store. How are these people even making money? And I remember one of the families next door to the Oaxacans was making the pastries, and So they would roll the dough out, and it was all handmade and everything, and they would go around and sell them, and I think they were making 40, $50 a day cleared, and somehow they were surviving on that. And so,
Oh, that sweet bread or something?
yeah, the sweet
Oh,
bread and those pastries, kind of like Mexican pastries.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so to me, there's without the knowledge of the oppression that's taken place in the world today, and that's why immersing yourself in the culture really helps out, and that's where the work of missionaries, when you go to these other countries, I know it's changed a lot of people's lives overnight. You see these people now. We knew a pastor and his wife personally, and the wife was a little bit kind of uppity, and she, had her little nails done and driving her nice car and stuff. And they went, you know who I'm talking about, don't you? They went overseas, and when they came back, she was a totally different person.
She sold her house and downsized to a small house, and then he eventually died. He wouldn't eat over there. He felt such great. He felt guilty because he was really, really heavy, and they kept touching him, and he said that every time he would just feel everyone touching him. He quit looking around at everybody, but they never seen anyone really heavy like that. He was like over a couple 100 pounds overweight. His wife was real tiny though. When he came back, I think he only lived 9 months after he came back, and he died. I don't know what he died of, but
Yeah, it was kind of a sad story, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
But his wife, she sold all those rings on her hand and all that. What would she have? Like a really expensive car and a house.
Mm-hmm.
Sold it all.
That's right. Yeah. It was a life-changing experience. And when we close our ears to the oppressed, we turn our face against God, because it is our duty to be listeners and to, a lot of times, you can reach somebody, if they're searching for God, you can literally just reach them by just listening to that person. A lot of times we love to talk, and we love to tell people about the greatness of God, and we're told to do that, right? That's a command in the Bible, that we're to proclaim the goodness of God. But a lot of times, just by living out that example means a lot more to people, and just being that ear to sit there and that shoulder for them means more to people than anything else. And the love of God is expressed oftentimes just literally through just listening to people and to empathize with their story. Now, Reformation says they knew how long it would be until they received their inheritance, but they lacked the faith, just like today's people say, where is the promise of his coming? 2 Peter 3:4. That's true. So many people nowadays, they're kind of at the brink of their faith, where we've all once experienced that real close connection with God, or so we see, so it seems. And then, time and just wear and tear, age, everything that's going on in this world seems to just wear us down over time, and we get tired, and we start to slip, and pretty soon we're forgetting God. It's an easy thing to do, Christian Progress says truth, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing.
Sometimes my faith is stronger than other times. I mean, if I'm around a lot of people that are cussing or drinking or whatever, which is usually my children, but it kind of makes you mad, and you've got all these different emotions and feelings, and then you just kind of forget about God. You're almost thinking, why are you allowing this to happen? I don't know, just you kind of blame it on him subconsciously when things are not going right. And especially when you don't do anything. I don't do anything but cook and clean and work and come home. And I'm thinking, why does all this stuff have to happen to me?
Yeah, exactly right. There is that feeling of abandonment by God from time to time. And this is how the people must have sort of almost been blaming God. Maybe, I don't know. It doesn't say that. But, to cry out to God Sometimes we do blame God, don't we? Like for our
Well,
problems, our circumstances.
it also says when they were in the desert, they missed their stew pots. I wonder what all they actually missed. I wonder what else was going on.
Well,
I mean, was there some sort of like rituals? Was there some sort of things that they were doing?
oh, well, listen, they
I
were
mean,
they were in a land of pagan gods. And so these all of the flesh that they ate had to have been sacrificed to foreign gods. There was probably alcohol available at will. There was other things. I mean, they missed their leeks and their onions and things like that. I mean, this was food that was prepared with savory flavors and things, you know. It's funny how the Bible always goes back to food.
mm-hmm.
If you read the stories carefully, it'll always go back to food. People nowadays, Christian nowadays, they will discount the food part of the Christian experience very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of reference to food in the Bible. Check it out. You'll see I'm telling you the truth. And so there was this fleshly desire for mankind to go back and to eat a certain way and to live a certain way. It was
Well,
the
they didn't
lust of
like
the
the
flesh.
wafers. They didn't like the wafers on Saturday, or the, what was that called?
Manna?
The manna. It was sweet like a cookie, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like honey, like what they say, wafers prepared with honey or something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, this is, I mean, it was a perfect food, but that's not something they wanted over and over again.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, they got tired of it, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we do that too. We get tired of God's goodness. Why? I mean, how is that possible? But you know, when life is good, we tend to forget. When
Mm-hmm.
life is hard, we cry out to God,
Mm-hmm.
and so then we wonder why our life is always hard.
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
well, maybe God is trying to reach us.
Mm-hmm.
So let me catch this one. Heaven soon says the prophets of Moses, but right on time he led them out. Peter says that they will say today, where is the promise of his coming? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's in Hebrews chapter 4. So there is this wonderment of God's people. Now, those who are vigilant and are watchful will know the hour of his visitation. They will sense his, you know, when Jesus is going to come. It says that we can know when it is near, even at the door. But it also says we won't know the day or the hour. Now, there was a quote made by Ellen White years ago that she says that verse will be used to scorn those who proclaim the second coming of Christ, because it was used in her day when during the Millerite movement there was the cry, you know, that went forth, Jesus is coming, you know, and they thought they knew exactly which day and hour, and the churches in that day scorned them and said, no one knows the day or the hour. Now that was brought to their scorn, and so she says that it will happen again in the last days, that when we proclaim the second coming, people will say that exact same thing. And even the Bible says that they will mock those who proclaim the second coming, saying, you know, where is the promise of his coming?
Mm-hmm.
You know, for things have continued since the beginning as they are today, and there has been no change. In other words, when you say, well, there's wars and rumors of wars, people will retort and say, well, there's always been wars. Well, you say,
Yeah.
well, there's earthquakes. Well, there's always been earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
There's famines. Oh, well, there's always been famines. You know, so what's different today than it was yesterday is what the scoffers will say. In the last days, scoffers will come, and they'll say, where's the promise of his coming? And so, and they will say these things. You
They'll
don't
say,
know the hour. Or the,
everybody's been saying that God's coming soon, and
That-
that's been thousands of years, right? But I like what the last trumpet blast says.
Bart.
They went from houses to tents. Well, some of them went yeah, they were houses to tents, and that kind of shelter and organization. They were more dependent on God than ever before. Yeah, they were dependent with their water, the pillar of the cloud for shade. It must have been really hot. I know I I want to like dive underneath any kind of little branch when I'm out on the river. It was hot. And yeah, I could see it kept them warm during the nighttime, and cool during the day, fed them. There was that water, that body of water. Remember, they threw a branch in it, and then all of a sudden it was drinkable.
It healed the waters with the branch.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
the branch of which is Jesus, which is the grafting on. we watched that sermon. That was fantastic. But yeah, that all these miracles that they witnessed for 40 years, and none of them got to go into the Canaan's land. I mean, very little.
and that's interesting.
They trained him just like our life. I mean, what? How many years was he out there? 40 years?
Wandered 40 years in the desert.
And then they didn't even make it.
It was a quick trip. All they had to do was go from point A to point B. And this is indicative of our walk. It's literally a quick trip, folks. Salvation is here. Just take it. Jesus is at our doors, and he's knocking. And it says, blessed is he who opens that door. He'll come in and sup with us. But we have this long mental route that we're taking to find this salvation, to find that peace that surpasses all understanding, to find the promised land. Now I know the promised land then is representative of something else. Now it says that Israel would inherit the lands forever, right? Well, they're not going to inherit it forever the way the earth is today. Why would God give Israel the land forever now just to destroy it, recreate the earth, and then just re-give it to them? That doesn't make sense. So obviously this is speaking of something bigger than what our minds are attached to. You know, spiritual things are spiritually discerned. And so when God said that they would inherit the lands forever, he's talking about the redeemed that would inherit the promised land, the real promised land, the one that has been given to God's people after man's redemption, after the cleansing of the earth, after the rebirth, after the recreation, everything that he's doing in our lives individually today, he's going to do ultimately to the whole earth. And then that is going to be repatriated to mankind. And so the redeemed, it says, will long enjoy the works of their hands. And so we'll build houses and inhabit them. We'll plant vineyards and eat the fruits thereof. It says children will be playing in the streets. This is 1,000 years after the second coming. Remember, he's going to recreate the earth. He's going to burn it with fire, and then it gets recreated. And then we're going to be placed on this earth to inhabit it. And there will be children in the streets after the 1,000 years. This is in Isaiah. You know, so lots of stuff to think about. It's a beautiful picture of what's going to take place. It says, heaven soon says he has always provided, but it becomes so much clearer when you lose everything.
Yeah, I've always watched those people that have lost their house, lost everything, and the humble numbing just slaps them. They've lost everything. They maybe grabbed the important papers or something, but they've lost everything. Not life, not their kids, but their house,
Possessions.
and their possessions. And some of them feel free. I mean, they obviously miss their stuff, but they have to compromise in their head and say, it's okay. It's okay. It was just stuff, you know. You see all these tragedies that are happening all around the world now.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think over half of them feel that way. I mean, no one likes to lose their stuff, but it gives you a sense of, well, you know, I could go do what I want to do. I could go over here. I could go over there, you know. Maybe it set them free. And that's kind of like how I'd feel if it happened to me.
Heaven soon says, no, Abraham's descendants are still there and still fighting over that land. And everyone's DNA holds genetics and belongs to Abraham because the people were spread out over the entire world. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But ultimately, look, heaven soon, the DNA and the genetics of our fathers is going to doom us to damnation. There is no redemptive power or ability in the DNA of mankind. It is when Jesus' DNA is spliced with ours, his blood, his redemptive blood, and we're grafted into the family, like Lisa said. We have to be grafted into this family and called by his name before we can gain the salvation and be called his own. Now, all who are called Christians, let's use the word Christians, are not all Christians, right? Because that's a name given. We call ourselves after the similitude of Jesus. Prior to the name Jesus, they called themselves after the similitude of Israel. You know, Israel was the one who wrestled with God and prevailed, right? Abraham, all who were born according to the seed of Abraham, were heirs to the seed. Agreed. Abraham was given a special promise for his descendants in that piece of land. The world is for everyone, but Canaan was a specific inheritance. And again, I see where you guys are going with this, but the earth recreated is the promised land, and that is the ultimate. That's why, Moses was given that promise too, but he never entered into Canaan, did he not? But then later he was resurrected by Jesus himself, and the devil contested over his body. And so these were examples. The Pharisees in Jesus' time didn't get it right. They thought they had special, and they were in bondage by the Romans at this point. They thought they had special access to the world, just like the Zionists do nowadays. That their blood, that their seed had special import as to the inheritance that they were promised. It had nothing to do with Adam's bloodline. Adam's bloodline is a death sentence. It was the second Adam who would then come and give us the inheritance through his blood, namely Jesus Christ. Yeah. And we have to get this in our heads, guys. We have to understand this very important fact that lands are meaningless here now because these lands will be destroyed. The promise was never ultimately these lands. Now, there was a temporary promise that was given through conditions. And you can read this in Deuteronomy. But those conditions weren't met by those people. Just like Christians, and then in the entirety was given promises too. But we haven't lived up to those standards either. And so it's only those who are faithful to Jesus and the blood covenant. There is a covenant. Okay, so Trish says, I agree, Lisa. I'm trying to move and have too much stuff. None of it is truly essential. Heaven soon, physically, though, the DNA is in your blood. If I ran your DNA test all the way back, but still, you must choose your side. Yes. Right. And I mean, you can look at it that way, heaven soon. I mean, yes. If you're saying the blood of Abraham, now the blood of Abraham is split, like heaven soon has pointed out, is probably thriving in everybody's veins to this day. Let's face it, And so, I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but it still focuses too much on man's DNA. The very thing that we want to disconnect ourselves from is our fathers, right? Because under the third and fourth generations, we carry those sins. And so if we disconnect from our earthly father and we join with our heavenly Father, then that is what's going to give us eternal life. So that's what in heaven soon, Jesus holds Jerusalem sacred because it was where he created man in the navel of the earth, and it was there Jesus kept the promise to take man's place. Well, Jerusalem means the city of peace, and the today's city of peace is no city of peace. There is a Jerusalem, the city of peace that has been created, that is a city in heaven which we will inhabit one day, right? And so there is the typology of the one on earth, but that's just typology. The actual is in heaven. Moses was a type of Christ. He wasn't the actual Christ, and there are many types of Christ, but there was only one genuine. And the people, the children of Israel, was a typology of the children of God that would later reign over the entire earth one day. They were just a type. The actual was those who accepted the blood covenant of Jesus. Plain and simple. That's what it is. And so, all right.
I think that sermon, I'm not positive, by Ivor was the blueprint. I'm almost positive, but it was such a good one because it talks about wood. So everything is about wood. It was about the fig tree not producing. It was about the branch that got thrown into the water that made the water drinkable. It was about um, the the olive branch that was brought back to the Noah's Ark. It was a whole bunch of different stuff. It was about where the Bible says we're grafted in, and now we're his disciples, or we are his
Descendants.
Descendants. It was just a million different things about wood in the Bible. It's unbelievable how many times wood is brought up, but it's called the blueprint of Ivor.
The blueprint. Well, and he spoke of the law, and he spoke of a lot of different things in that whole series.
Right.
Now
typologies.
You were reading about the midwives. Let's switch to that because that's on Tuesday's lessons here, and now that's got. I mean, we mentioned it earlier, in the lesson, but let's go over it again.
So Exodus 1:17. But the midwives feared God and did as the king of Egypt commanded them. They saved the man-child. Oh, I'm sorry, they did not. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said, "Hey, why are you doing this? Why are you keeping the men children alive?" And the midwife said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women. They are lively, and they deliver and are delivered. The midwives come unto them." So they're saying that they're strong. That's
no, I just got that. So they are strong. They deliver before we can even get there.
Oh, okay.
The child has already been delivered. We don't have time to go over there and hold our hand over its mouth like you've commanded us. The children are already born. And they're strong women. Are we to just pull them out of their arms? It's impossible.
Because they're not like the Egyptian
They're not like the Egyptian women who labor and labor and labor. Okay, I finally got that.
God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mightily. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And the Pharaoh charged all the people, saying, "Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive." Number 2 on Exodus says, "And there went a man to the house of Levi and took a wife," and it goes on to talk about how Moses, what the lineage of Moses was. And then, anyways, we already went through that. The daughter watched what's going to happen to her brother. The Pharaoh's daughter goes down, bathes, sends the midwife over to grab the baby, keeps the man-child, names him Moses. Yeah. So, interesting story. Millions of children that are born. Did they end up throwing those children to the male children into the drink?
It doesn't sound like any were.
Okay.
There might have been some that were forced to do that. I don't know.
Okay.
But again, this mirrors what took place during Jesus' time. The male children were all killed because a king was going to be born, or so it was rumored. But, the fact that it was commanded that all of the male children be killed was Satan trying to ultimately trump the prophecies of God, which of course he wasn't able to break through and do that. Mm-hmm. And it's always because maybe Satan even feared that Moses would be the Messiah. Mm-hmm. And so he was trying to intervene with all he could. And of course he was intervening through the principalities of the earth, the rulers of this earth. And so it happened back then, and now we have the same things going on now. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see corruption in our governments. We shouldn't be surprised that things are happening on the high level. Now, of course, even within the church and the church leadership, this goes back to that. We have corrupt leaders, but we also have God working in there too. And we can't forget that this is the great controversy between Christ and Satan, where we see both sides struggling for power. Right? Now, ultimately, God, through his great wisdom, wins. and reigns victorious. But we can see the workings of Satan. That does not take away from the fact that God is there too.
Well, we got free choice, and we can. It shows. Everyone has a measure of faith, and every day we have to shirk that. We either have to feed our faith, or we have to push it away. Or what I'm saying is, it's there for the taking, and there's a lot of people who don't want it. They just choose not to have it. They choose not to have God. So, anyways, I was going back to that wood. Remember the ark? It was made out of the gopher wood, and then it goes on about the 12 tribes. You know, the Shekinah glory, the mercy seat, and all that stuff. That was made out of certain wood, and of course, God wanted it a certain way. And then here's the burning bush. So when Moses escapes to Midian, you know, he's running because he killed an Egyptian, smiting the Egyptian, and then he runs. He runs across a burning bush. You know, so there's so many similarities of wood in there, just all sprinkled throughout the Bible. I just thought it was so cool. It was a sermon I never thought I'd ever hear, you know. It just made so much sense. So
yeah, when you read about the branch, you know, and the seed that came from the root of Jesse, and ultimately it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, again wood, right?
Wood, yeah.
That was eaten from, that caused man to fall. Mm-hmm. It was the tree of the life that ultimately was going to be given back to man because of the tree that Jesus hung on.
Oh,
and
yeah,
was given
tree.
and was received the curse, because it says, "Cursed is everyone who hangeth from a tree." And so,
and then look at Absalom, hung from between the land and the earth. I mean the heaven and the earth.
That's a good point. And he was pierced 3 times. Mm-hmm. Now people hate that kind of typology because Absalom was the bad guy, but remember, Jesus was the bad guy too.
What was the one that was the one that was with Delilah, and he pushed the pillars?
Samson.
Yeah, and all this stuff that you know.
He died with stretched out hands,
pushing on the pillars. I don't know if they were wood or not, but
they were probably stone. But
stone, yeah. But this is so much typology in the Word.
He was sold for silver. He was a Nazarite.
Judas was sold for silver, or sold Jesus for silver.
Judas sold Jesus for silver. That's right.
And then look at the very beginning of this with Jacob. No, not Jacob. What's the Joseph?
Joseph.
Yes.
So many names.
I'm always saying different names. I have 3 boys, and I always call Caden Garrett because we had a blonde-haired, blue-eyed son, and I go, Garrett, get down off there. Oh, I mean, Caden, get down off there.
Clancy, Levi, Garrett, Caden, whoever you are.
Just, you know what you're doing. Get down.
Yeah, for sure. So Reformation says the lesson states Hatshepsut adopted Moses as her son, but she was born circa 1530 BC, 14 years after Moses was born. Most historians, however, put her birth in 1505, 39 years after Moses's. Okay? So, and Heaven Soon says she couldn't have been his mom, his adoptive mother. And so Moses' parents were not afraid of the death decree because they feared God and had faith in Exodus 1:20. And that's the point. I mean, even though they kind of forgot who God was,
they were in a dilemma. They
had a semblance of what God wanted, and they had that still small voice, that conscience. Mm-hmm. Their conscience was speaking to them. They couldn't do this evil thing that they were commanded to do. And they were going against the law of the land. Mm-hmm. And when the law of the land commands us to do something contrary to God's law, we are always to follow God's way over the law of the land. If the law of the land commands us to do something that's not against God, we are to always follow it. Is that correct? So we are told in Romans that we are to follow the laws of the land and to esteem them as the law of God as well, until they command us to do otherwise against the law of God. So very good principle here, and something that will be also lived out in the last days, because this story of the Exodus is really a story of every individual life coming out of sin. Our past life is like Egypt. Our present life is like the 40 years through the desert. Now, of course, we didn't have to go through that 40 years. We could have just immediately gone into the promised land and not have feared the giants and just started eating immediately from the great abundance that God had given the children of Israel in the land of Canaan and prepared for them.
I'm in my 50s and I'm still in danger.
I think you and I have been wandering for more like 50 years, haven't we?
Yeah. We're over here saying, why? Look how dumb these people are. But everyone does it.
Yeah, and and that's where we all relate and can understand and really empathize with each other's problems and struggles, because we literally are walking in the same footsteps that the children of Israel walked in, even though that we're looking at the story and say, how in the world could they be so stupid? Well, you just look in the mirror. That's the reason why, because, humankind.
Stubborn.
Yeah. And so it says, Reformation says, Josephus and other records reveal that Moses was a great military leader, being a very successful Egyptian general on campaigns into Africa. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, he did live in the courts of Egypt. We forget that. He was 40 years old when he left Egypt when he was about 40 years old. Did you know that?
No.
He wandered and lived with Jethro. That's the name of our oldest dog, our biggest dog. He lived with Jethro for 40 years, and then he came back and he led the children of Israel for 40 years. He was 120 years old at his death.
Wow.
So he was 40 years old before he left the courts of Egypt. 40. And then he was 80 when he came back to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. Amazing. Now that's interesting because, and it says, Reformation says, I'm sure there were days that preferred leading Egypt's armies than the Israelites. He preferred, they were probably a lot more obedient than the Israelites were. Here's a ragtag bunch of, kids that really were just kind of hard to deal with. Jethro and the Midian was the son of Abraham. Heaven soon says, Exodus 17:10, Joshua was directed by Moses in the fight with the Amalekites. Esau's bunch, Exodus 17:8-16. And that makes a lot of sense that he was schooled in the art of war. Now remember that Joshua was not, because when they came down out of the mount, the children of Israel had made a golden calf and they were worshiping it, and they rose up to play, it said. And Joshua said, behold, it is as the sound of war.
War, yeah.
And what did Moses do? He listened. He says, no, that's not war. Moses knew what war sounded like. And he says, no, that's not war. That's something else. And so there was a great tumult down there, but Moses knew well that it was not the sound of war. And so that's a good point that you guys are making here about him being a great military leader. He had formal training in these things. And so God prepares us through our life experience, and he gives us the training that's necessary so that we can meet the tasks at hand. And that's a good promise. That's a good thing. We're out of time, folks. Boy, that went fast. Thanks so much for all of your guys' participation. Thank you guys for being the greatest part of Prophecy Montana. Thank you for being loyal followers. You guys
Thank you for being salve on our hearts, because you help us very much.
It really does. Without you guys, we would be vagabonds in a strange land that is hostile. And because of you guys, we have a family. And, it really is very comforting to know that we can just go online and we have all of you guys to encourage us and to keep us moving forward. So last trumpet says he learned how to truly lead when he became a shepherd by God's leading. And that would be the second half of his training, wouldn't it? Because the first half was in the courts of Egypt, where he learned all these military things, how to control man, how to do this and how to do that. But then he lacked that humility. So then he had to become a shepherd of sheep and learn to lead God's flock. So Josephus says that in the battles with the Ethiopia, it's when he married his first wife, whom the siblings were criticizing.
Yeah.
Okay. So
wasn't she black?
Yeah, she was Ethiopian. Well, it was surmised that she was black. Yes, she was. Well, I think it says somewhere in the Bible that she was Nubian. So definitely, she was definitely black. And Nubian is about as black as you can get. Like some of those, like that one model.
That model is gorgeous.
She would probably be considered Nubian. She is so black. I mean, she is just about as black as you can get, and an absolutely gorgeous example of a woman. God has made all of mankind interesting, and these are all expressions of his love, and the devil has taken it and made it so that the nations would divide against one another.
Divide us, yeah.
Yeah, and so, well, folks, thank you so much again. God bless each and every one of you guys. We will see you guys here shortly. Don't forget tonight, we're going to be joining with Liza and Tim Grady for another discussion. And so hopefully it'll be a little bit more refined. Tim has been doing his research. Liza has been doing her research. And so we're going to have a great discussion. We'll see you guys tonight at 7 Mountain Time. So